So, you want to explore a dungeon in a medieval fantasy game like Dungeons & Dragons, Shadowdark RPG, or Dungeon Crawl Classics, but you wonder about the limitations of the system. How large can this dungeon be? Is there a practical limit on how large an area to explore can be? But more importantly, if you want to explore a place that's so vast that areas are divided by maybe hours of exploration, how can you do that? Welcome to Elven Tower Adventures, my name is Derek. I am a cartographer by trade, maybe you've seen some of my maps. So maybe my opinion on maps and how to explore dungeons has some weight to it. When you read adventures written for Dungeons & Dragons, you often see maps like these. I'm including some of mine, but also some by other cartographers. Some of them are small enough that they are pretty much just one area. They are great for combat, for like a great battle, like a big boss battle. But after those, the majority of maps that you'll find online will have between 6 and maybe 15 explorable areas, and all the areas that you can visit are pretty much next to each other. A bad map will have all the areas in a linear order. These linear maps are often frowned upon by the community, but sometimes a linear adventure is fine. Others will have many connections between the rooms that allow the characters to explore the dungeons however they want, but in the end, all of the areas are next to each other, and the place tends to be rather small. Why are the areas next to each other, you might wonder? And there are many answers to that. First, it makes sense. When the place was built, it doesn't make sense to separate the areas that much. For practical purposes, it's just one building or one dungeon or one castle, everything is together. There's another reason, and that is that it is practical for the characters to explore the places in a sequential order. It makes sense to have the whole map in one page, or maybe 2 pages if it's like a 2-level map, and there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not criticizing. I have made a lot of maps like these, but then you get to a problem. What if I want to explore a place that's larger than this? There are some maps out there of the so-called mega dungeons, and you can see some of them right here. This is pretty much just the same approach, except there's dozens of areas, and the maps tend to have very little detail because then they would be pretty large. But even these maps are actually not that large. If you discount how dangerous they are because there are monsters and traps and everything, if you started to walk from one side to the other, what would it take you? 10 minutes? Maybe 20 minutes? They are large, yes, but they are not that large. Are they as large as the Mines of Moria in The Lord of the Rings? They're not. And that is the perfect way to explain what I am talking about when I say exploration of large areas. In The Lord of the Rings, the Fellowship of the Ring, they want to cross a mountain range. They want to go through the Mines of Moria from one side of the world to the other to reach the forests of Lothlorien. It takes the Fellowship of the Ring approximately 43 hours to go from one end to the other. On the way, they visit several points of interest. You could call them dungeon rooms, where there are some things to investigate, to explore, some fights. But if you think about it, how long does it take the Fellowship of the Ring to go from the entrance of Moria to the next room, and then to the next room, and then all the areas that they visit? It probably takes them hours. If you want to do that with a common Dungeons & Dragons map, it doesn't work. They are very small, and if you want to recreate the feeling of exploring such a large place as the Mines of Moria, Dungeons & Dragons pretty much doesn't cut it. It doesn't have a rule set for that. It also matters that during the traversal of the Mines of Moria, the Fellowship, at some point they get lost, and Gandalf doesn't know how to proceed. They also find some areas that they didn't intend to visit, it's just that they stumble upon them on the way. All this I'm describing, it cannot really happen with the common dungeon, with the normal dungeon maps that we often use. Also, this doesn't happen only in the Mines of Moria. There are other examples in media where this happens. For example, in the anime series Sword Art Online, when they try to explore the Infinite Tower, it's just like that. It's just a large tower with infinite floors, and they just have to go through them one by one, but it's like an endless dungeon crawl. In another popular anime series called Dungeon Meshi, or Delicious in Dungeon, depending on the translation, the dungeon is also so vast that they are just walking through empty hallways and chambers, and it's implied that it takes the party hours from one point of interest to the next. By the way, if you know of other examples of places that are very large and time consuming to explore, I would love to hear them. Please leave a comment down here, I'd like to know. So I came up with an idea of how to do this. A rule set for exploring locations as large as the Mines of Moria, where you as the GM can present the characters with a way to interact with a dungeon as big as this one and have it feel interesting. A caveat to this is that an important thing to have is darkness being a real challenge. Unfortunately, in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, pretty much all the races or ancestries except humans have dark vision, so that's kind of a limitation. I would recommend to curve that and remove the dark vision, but I guess maybe it cannot be done in D&D 5e. But if you are playing an OSR system or just a different system, or your players are willing to try, I would advise that darkness is a thing that's dangerous and that you have to really manage your light sources. If you think about it, when the Fellowship of the Ring is exploring Moria, light is important. They bring torches. Gandalf has the light spell on his staff, and that's important in some points of the journey. It should be a thing that you are 8 hours into an exploration of a dungeon crawl, and there is no guarantee that your light is going to last, and that the characters are worried on how to do it. Coming back to what I was saying, I came up with a rule set. We have talked about it in the Chaotic Stupid show, so maybe you already know. It's also shared on our Patreon page. I'm leaving a link down here in the description. The name is Dungeon Crawling with Style. If we zoom out, it works like this. As the GM, instead of a map, you have a list of important areas. Think of this as the important rooms that the Fellowship visits in the Mines of Moria. The areas would be, number 1, the entrance to the Mines of Moria, the Doors of Durin. This is where they have the squid monster fight. Then there is the 21st Hall. This is glossed over in the movie, but the Fellowship rests in this room after the fight. Then they find the Chamber of Records, where they find Balin's tomb. Here they find some crucial information about what happened to Balin and his dwarfs, and then they have a fight with orcs and the troll. There's that great area where Gandalf lights up the place, the Grand Gallery of Khazad Dûm, and then they also have the start of a fight that's interrupted by the arrival of the Balrog, and then the famous chase to reach the Bridge of Khazad Dûm, where Gandalf fights the Balrog, and then the exit near the forests of Lothlorien. So that's like 6, maybe 8 points of interest. You could have more. I just ran a Dungeons & Dragons game recently where I had a dungeon with a list of 12 areas. By the way, this video is sponsored by no one. This is a very small channel, we don't have sponsors, but we have a very loyal and amazing community of supporters on Patreon. So if you're looking for some indie-made content with heart and style, you're missing out. Come check out our wares. There's lots of free content also that we distribute all the time. And if you are a sponsor and you would like a spot, well, this is where you might have it. Okay, back to the subject. So when the characters get into the dungeon, it works like this. First, they get to the first area. That's for free and they find or fight whatever is there. When they want to push deeper into the dungeon, someone has to make an exploration roll. This is a 2d6 roll, no modifiers, anyone can do it. The higher result, the better. Maybe if a character is knowledgeable about the place or they have a special quest or whatever, I don't know, you are the GM, but maybe someone has a modifier to this roll. I would advise to keep it low, maybe +1, but it's not really needed. The result for the push deeper roll, the exploration roll, has 3 possible options. Option 1 is that they move forward 1d3 areas in the numbered list. They are also unaware if any areas were left behind unexplored, and there is a 50% chance that a random event happen. Now for this to work, you would need a list of random events. They could be combat encounters or NPC encounters or just some interesting things they find in the dungeon. I recommend having a list of at least 6 of them. Here's an example of the one I used in a recent adventure. Option number 2 is that the characters move up 1d4 areas down the numbered list, but in this case they are aware of any areas left behind unexplored. There's also a 25% chance of a random encounter. And then the third option is that they move 1d6 areas down the list. They are obviously aware of any areas left behind and there are no encounters. So the first thing that becomes apparent after explaining this is that characters can have a non-linear exploration. Like they can start in area 1, roll a 9 in the exploration roll, and then move up 4 areas. They would go from area 1 to area 5, leaving 3 areas unexplored, but they would be aware that they were left behind. Now, how would that happen in the game? That's pretty easy. Maybe they reach a bifurcation on the road. There's 3 paths, and they go down one path and reach area 5, but they could then come back and explore the other paths. But the most important thing is that as the GM, you probably put the goal of the dungeon at the very end. If we go back to the Lord of the Rings example, the goal is to reach the other side of the mountain. The characters do not have, nor do they want, to explore every room in the Mines of Moria. They have one objective, and that's to reach the forests. So whatever is the goal in your dungeon, maybe retrieve an artifact, or maybe it's to just get to the other side like in the Mines of Moria, or maybe it's to find the lair of a monster that the characters need to defeat, or maybe they have to find a magical portal to reach another plane of existence. Whatever it is, it's at the end of the list. So characters may choose to leave some areas behind and capitalize on the high rolls in the exploration roll if they get them and they just push through the dungeon to reach the end. There is a drawback, obviously. They might leave behind some treasure or valuable information, but that's on them. I think they should have the option to rush through the dungeon if they have the chance to do that. Now, what happens if the characters need to go back to a previously explored area in this rule set? This is the moving back procedure. They also have to do an exploration check in the same manner, but the results are a little different. First, if they want to go back to a previously explored area, they just can choose the area on the list, roll, and they might get there. On a result of 2 to 5, the characters get lost on the way and find a random location that's yet unexplored 1d6 areas from the place where they started. This is like a worst case scenario because maybe the characters were going back to a safe room to rest, but they get lost and then they get involved in whatever is in this new area. On a 6 to 9, they actually reach the place they were looking for, but there is a 25% chance that something happens. On a 10 to 12, they reach the previously explored area with no setbacks. And finally, if the goal of the dungeon is not to reach the exit at the other side, then when the characters finish whatever quest they came here to do, if they want to exit the dungeon, that's automatic. They just have to roll 2d6, that's the number of hours it takes them to return to the entrance. No problem, because the adventure is over. In the PDF, I included the following example. The characters need to explore a large cavern network similar to the Mines of Moria, but their objective is different. They have to find the lair of a dragon, and their goal is to retrieve a magical goblet that's hidden in the dragon's hoard. They can or may kill the dragon if they want, but that's not the objective. The objective is to get the magical item. And for this example, and this is a very simplistic example with just a 3-line description for each area, but you can go as deep as you want, this is a list of the 15 areas that are encompassed in this example. One of the benefits of using a system like this is that you could use the small encounter maps that I showed at the beginning of the video. Those maps that are great for one battle, you could assign some of those maps to some of the areas in the dungeon. So you could make use of many maps for this, but only those encounter maps, not the dungeon maps. Alrighty, adventurer. With this valuable information, hopefully you can have a large dungeon crawl exploration in your next session. I wish you, the GM, the best, but I wish the party the worst. Alright? I think that's it for this one. Thank you for watching. My name is Derek, and this is Elven Tower Adventures.